Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. Hurrah! We have all three hosts here today. I'm Dre Alvarez. With me is Patrick Minton and Brian Foster. I'll let them get introductions after the tease, which is we're going to be talking some trade rumor nonsense, which we'll probably admit to be nonsense. But basically, Hassan Whiteside is apparently, I don't know if he's on the block, if people are vying for him, but something's going on in Miami with Hassan Whiteside. We'll give our thoughts on that. Rest assured, we have more concrete information than that. We're going to talk the Spurs, who are surging to being number 2 in the NBA thanks to the inevitable downturn of the Golden State Warriors, who, they're so last week at this point. And finally, we might give a little bit of talk to a history lesson I gave on the 1980s Lakers. All right, Patrick, give a shout out real quick so our viewers know your voice.
Hello, everybody. How are you?
That's awesome. And as always, we are produced by Brian Foster, our voice of God. Brian, give a shout out.
Hello, everyone. We're doing great.
All right. So anyway, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about Hassan Whiteside. So you're in the loop. I don't actually know where it originated. I haven't done enough research to know that. But
Sheridan Hoops, I believe, Dre. Chris Sheridan.
Okay, so Sheridan Hoops started talking about the possibility of Whiteside maybe going to Houston. There's some possible trade rumblings in the mix, and the reason is very simple. Whiteside currently plays for the Heat and is amazing. However, after this year is up, his deal is up, and they do not have his bird rights, which means they're not allowed to go over the cap to sign him. And additionally, they are basically locked into Chris Bosh long for $20 million. And they got this Dwayne Wade guy who it's going to be hard to turn away. So that's the situation. And Patrick, I'm actually just going to let you jump in because you had a lot of thoughts on this because I think people are misunderstanding us. People are thinking, why on earth would the Heat trade Whiteside? He's amazing. You guys are in love with him, but it's not that simple.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a classic situation of they're evaluating the offers that are coming in and they're saying, well, do we just let him go at the end of the year and get nothing and, profit from his amazing play for the 50 odd games that are left in the season, 60 games that are left in the season? Or, if a trade offer comes in that lets us get something that we can, keep long term, do we evaluate those offers? And I think it's actually kind of a bit of it's a balancing act because when people always say, well, you don't want to let him go for nothing, the point is that as the season goes on, Whiteside actually gets less and less valuable because whatever team trades for him is going to be in the same spot as Miami. They won't have his bird rights. Even if they have cap space, they won't have like that extra sort of oomph to add to the contract to ensure that he'll stay with them as opposed to going to some other team that has max space. And a lot of teams are going to have max space next year. So any team that's looking to get Whiteside now cares about how he is playing right now in this season. Like they want to win this season for 50 odd games with Hassan Whiteside before, entering into negotiations for next year. That means nobody's going to give up, a really promising player. Like nobody's going to give up like Julius Randle for him or anything like that. So how much can you really get back?
I'd bench that guy, Patrick. Randall doesn't deserve any playing time.
And to your point there, no team that's going into the lottery would want him because it's the worst of all scenarios. If there's a team like the Lakers, in theory, right, have maybe some assets that they could go for him, but it's not worth their time because all they're going to do is sorry about that, someone just pinged me. All they're going to do is make themselves worse in the draft lottery and can't really do much about it. So really the only teams that, like you said, are going to want Whiteside are playoff contending teams that think he is the missing piece this season, that have assets that they could give up for him, that the Heat would actually want. And it also gets into kind of a game theory dilemma. If that's my scenario, I wait until just before the trade deadline and I offer the Heat as bare minimum. I'm like, I'll give you a second rounder for Whiteside.
You look at a team like Houston, like they could probably benefit a lot from Hassan Whiteside right now. But at the trade deadline, they might be like in 9th place and like they might be so far back that they're thinking, well, there's only 20 games left. If Whiteside wins me an extra 2 games, what's that really going to do for me? Whereas right now, you have 50 games less. You might say, well, Whiteside wins me an extra 5 games. That's valuable.
But then they'd have to know at the same time, like the Rock, they can't give up Dwight Howard for him because even though, yes, Whiteside's better than Howard, they can't believe that he is going to win them so many more games in that amount of time that it's necessarily worth buying, I guess, quote unquote, high right now.
Yeah, the caveat I would have there, though, is that Whiteside is probably likely to play most of those 50 games, whereas Howard, given
No,
his
that is
history,
a good point, but
I don't know. I mean, given his history, Howard might very well not play any of the games. I mean, sorry, many of the games, right? He could totally miss 20, 30 games easily.
and then one thing that's interesting about all of this that we haven't really brought up that I think is funny is all that they have to do really to justifiably afford him is either show Dwayne Wade the door or tell him if you want to keep playing for us, take a major pay cut. But that's also if Whiteside wants to stay. So
Yeah.
those two things have to go
Well,
together.
yeah. The key is that they have to renounce the bird rights to Dwayne Wade, which would release his cap hold. That doesn't mean they couldn't still sign Dwayne Wade, but it does kind of. I mean, it definitely means they would have to convince Wade to take a pay cut, and it seems like it's that time of Wade's career where he should be taking a pay cut. But with so many teams with cap space, you never know. And plus, the Heat are sort of in that situation where they don't want to appear as if they are cold and ungrateful to Dwayne Wade. I mean, that's a lot of people speculate that's why he has the contract he currently has, is because it's kind of like a parachute, a golden parachute, right?
Well, also don't forget what happened was Dwayne Wade, great guy that he is, opts out of his guaranteed deal, says, look, I know you want to get Braun and Chris Bosh back, so I'm going to opt out. You guys negotiate. We figure me out next. And what they did is LeBron James leaves, goes to Cleveland, gets a better team in theory. At the time, they didn't know about Whiteside, obviously. Goes to Cleveland, gets a better team, gets a good contract for the upcoming CBA because he goes, I'm only going to take, I think, 1 year guaranteed, 1 year option, and then I'm going to get a huge deal when the new television stuff comes through. So LeBron ends up great. Chris Bosh gets extended to a max deal, gets paid over $100 million, and Dwayne Wade basically left, $8 million on the table to do that for them. So if now they renounce him and either give him nothing in return and max out Whiteside, they're in the possible public scrutiny thing, which you might argue doesn't matter. You might argue, hey, just deal with it.
Well, for the fans, it doesn't matter, but for potential other free agents, it matters, right?
And that's the key too. I would say you nailed it on the head, which is because Dwayne Wade is a marquee player. It's I call it like the Kevin Garnett problem is what I always call it when I talk to you guys about it, which is Kevin Garnett did not want to go to Boston until they signed Ray Allen, which you could look at that team and go, that's ludicrous, right? With Paul Pierce back healthy, with Rajon Rondo, who's great, with a couple other role players, that's a fantastic thing. He's like, I'm not going there until there's Ray Allen. So if you ostracize a potential free agent right when money gets big, you're screwed. So they're in a really weird position with Dwayne Wade.
Yeah, it's about that Celtics team. I don't think anybody. I mean, we knew Rondo was really good, but I don't think mainstream most people realized how good Rondo was.
Exactly.
There, I think at the time he had only just finished his rookie season, right?
And he was very good for a rookie, but still not what he even turned into.
And I think we at the time, everyone called us crazy, but we at the time said he was the deserving rookie of the year. But nobody sort of realized that Rondo would become such an important cog to a championship team.
And do you guys remember this at the time? When the Ray Allen trade did happen, it was for a draft pick. Everyone's saying, oh, that's way too much for Ray Allen, this old guy.
Are you kidding?
That was bizarre. No. I remember that take.
Draft pick, wasn't it? It was
maybe 2 draft picks or Jeff
so
Green.
So it was the rights to Jeff Green, and it was also Delonte West, I think, and Wally Szczerbiak.
Yeah, that trade was highway robbery, but I don't think conventional wisdom thought so at the time.
I think Ray Allen still had clout then. Are you kidding? I don't believe you. I mean, we could.
Oh, yeah, Ray Allen was still considered a star then.
We'll have to look it up.
Oh, and by the way, I guess according to our numbers,
I can tell you, people here did not think that that we're not happy about that trade.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I did just look it up. I guess Paul Millsap barely edged out Rondo, but I think part of that is if you recall back in those days, Patrick, before bowing to the multitude of fans that say we overrated rebounds, we did not used to count defensive rebounds as a team activity. So adjusting for that, Millsap barely edges out Rondo. He was still the number 2 rookie that year, according to what we were saying. Yeah. The other kind of really interesting part about Whiteside to me is do we know if he intends to play? Like, was there? I haven't checked the news enough, but were there any rumblings about that? Because that. If they're starting to look, it's either one of two things. It's either Daryl Morey doing he's actually quite good at this. If you recall, Daryl Morey is really good at sowing dissent in other teams. So the poison pill contracts that he offered back in
Yeah.
the day for like Jeremy, I mean, for better or for worse, right? He basically threw a really big grenade in the middle of another team's free agency negotiations.
Well, I mean, well, that stuff, yeah. But in terms of inquiring, calling to ask about Whiteside or whatever, like, I feel like he's just doing his due diligence as a general manager. He should be going out and basically he should be calling every team about their best player and say, hey, is there a possibility that you would move him and for what price? Just let me find out. Like, I mean, because you don't want to be the guy who doesn't ask and it turns out, oh, you totally could have had that if you just called up and made an offer. You never know. And I think Whiteside, it's not just Houston. I'm sure many teams are calling about Whiteside precisely because they know the Heat is in this situation where the Heat wants to get something for him. So here's again where I think this is a very potentially dangerous situation for Miami because when you look at things, like, what are you going to get in return from him? You might get a couple of like average players, but do you need average players? Like you could probably just get average players on free agency next year, right? I mean, the odds that you're going to get a very good player that you're going to be able to keep in exchange for Whiteside's like expiring contract, I think they're pretty low. I mean,
Well, the other thing is they're a contender right now.
yeah, and that's the other thing, right? You're in a playoff race, so you're looking at that possibility of basically sacrificing your current like ability to get to the playoffs in exchange for getting something for Hassan Whiteside, but that something might not be good enough to propel you into playoff contention next year. I mean, it's hard to say. Like obviously, if somebody calls up and and says, "Hey, I'll give you Jabari Parker for him," you say, "Oh yeah, sure, okay, we'll take that deal." But I don't think that's the kind of thing that people are offering. People might be offering like maybe a collection of second round picks and like a journeyman player or something like that. But or they might be offering things like Dwight Howard, who's also on an expiring contract, but it's kind of Dwight Howard you probably have the potential of signing Howard because you get his bird rights.
Yeah, and one thing that people may not realize if you don't read Larry Kuhn's salary cap FAQ for fun, like some of us do, is the last CBA sewed up what used to be what would happen in this scenario, which is this actually happened with Kevin Garnett. Sign and trades used to be prevalent, which is the original team would offer a deal to the player and then sign them to another team. And then that other team would get that contract and they would usually send back some consolation prizes. This is what happened, for instance, with LeBron James. LeBron James did want to just go outright to Miami from Cleveland back in the day, but to make it work to get him the contract he wanted, Cleveland signed him to that contract, then traded him to Miami, who then gave back, I think, a couple second round picks or something.
No. It was a lot more than that.
Was it?
Didn't they get 2 first round picks?
Was it first round? Okay, I'll look this
I remember
up.
that was back when sign and trades were a big deal, and if I'm not mistaken, I think even the Irving pick might have been. No, I don't think it was the Irving pick.
The Irving pick. What happened with the Irving pick was the Clippers dumped a pick to dump a bunch of salary, and then that ended up on Cleveland. But regardless, what I was just going to say is that can't happen anymore is the issue because that used to be an out for Miami. That's no longer an out. Basically, their only options are.
It is still an out, but the salary cap incentives for sign and trades are practically non-existent, which is why you don't see them anymore, right? Because there used to be pretty big incentives for both teams to do a sign and trade. Now the only incentives for a sign and trade really are for the player, so they just don't happen very much.
And by the way, I was way off. It was we were both kind of right, but it was the join. They traded 2 future first, 2 future second, and good trade. Like none of these players. Actually, it was for Jay Crowder, so the Celtics can thank the Cleveland in a roundabout way, I guess. And but yeah, I mean that's kind of where we're at there. I think I did say they're a contender. So I mean my personal strategy for Miami is try and win as much as you can this year. And that was my argument for Kevin Love too. Like even Kevin Love, where they had the bird rights, the argument is if you're a team that has any shot in the playoffs and has a star player, do your best to win now, because your best case scenario is to rebuild. Like you're saying, like the odds that they're going to quickly replace Whiteside's value. And what do we say he's at currently? I have not been paying attention. So he's got
his future value or his present value?
His current this season, like what?
Oh, he makes like 700,000 or something ridiculous.
Oh no!
Yeah, I've got it up on screen right now. He's making 981.
That's absurd, and he is, according to our numbers, the third best center in terms of total wins and the second best winner in terms of points over par per game on a permanent basis and a minute cutoff, right below DeAndre Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty much exactly like the Carlos Boozer situation 15 years ago, right?
Is it that long ago already? Jeez.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. It was.
Are you talking about where he reneged on the deal, Patrick?
No, I'm talking. Well, Cleveland let him out of his deal,
Right.
and he signed with Utah.
So it wasn't technically a reneging.
Cleveland did basically exactly the same thing that I think that Houston did with Chandler Parsons a couple years ago.
Right,
where
that's
could have
right.
kept him around for another year on his 4-year rookie deal, but instead reneged on the deal, right?
And as you noted, the Parsons theory around the campfire is that Parsons' agent also represented Dwight, and they basically said, you've got a really good shot at Dwight, but if you don't let Parsons out of his deal, you have a less good shot. At least that's the rumor. So I'm not verifying that.
You know what? We've got. Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
No, I was just gonna say I don't think there was anything like that with the Boozer situation, but the point was that at the time Cleveland, Boozer was like an amazing player on a nothing contract, and I think at the time he was making $300,000 or something, and everybody knew that they wouldn't really be able to keep him. If they just kind of let the contract play out and let him become an unrestricted free agent, and I don't remember what the exact situation was, but basically they said, hey, we'll let you out of your contract and you will wink wink nudge nudge, a year early, and you will wink wink nudge nudge, sign a deal that's for, I don't know what it was for, but it was probably a little bit less than his market value. So Cleveland's thinking, okay, so this way you make more money because you get to get a deal a year earlier, but your salary is going to be cheaper, which is good for us. So they let him out, and then Carlos Boozer was like, well, now that I'm free, fuck that. I'm just going to take my market value. And he went to Utah, right?
Yeah.
And the reason for him in that case, and actually Whiteside's like a similar case, the reason nobody's got Whiteside's bird rights is because was he a second round pick that bounced around, like was released at
Correct.
some point?
Yeah,
he was on Sacramento for 2 years, and now he's been on the Heat for 2 years.
Yeah, he was originally waived by Dallas? Don't remember.
I thought it was Sacramento.
He's only played for Sacramento
yeah,
other than the Heat. I don't know if he was drafted by someone else, though.
Yeah, Sacramento had him for 2 years. In his second year with Sacramento, in a 109 minutes, he played at star level, and then they chose to let that go instead of doing anything with that. And a lot of those, the Boozer situation, it's really funny because a lot of these historical cases that we're comparing this to, even Boozer, they keep shoring up the rules. So like Jeremy Lin, even the amount of money a second rounder is allowed to pick up in that scenario that you mentioned is getting less and less.
Well, I think with both Lynn and Whiteside, again, we'd have to get Larry Kuhn on the show, but neither of those players were on their rookie contracts, as I understand it, because in Lynn's case, it was Golden State.
Yep.
And in Whiteside's case, it was Sacramento. Both of those teams actually released the player. So the second team that picked them up actually picked them up on a free agent contract, even though they were only like a year or two in the league. So that's why the Whiteside won't become a restricted free agent, and they won't have bird rights because it's not a rookie contract. It's just a league minimum contract.
And it wasn't even until Gilbert Arenas that the second round picks had bird rights.
And by the way,
bird rights, whatever it is.
Exactly. And by the way, don't be surprised if after this, I'll put it in quotes, debacle, that in the next CBA that comes around with the next lockout, which is coming, just get used to it, fans, you're going to miss 30 games of basketball probably. Or you're going to miss less. And if you miss less, it means the players really caved. And
yeah,
it doesn't look like that with the new lawyer and stuff.
Yeah, Michelle Roberts won't let that happen, Dre. But I was going to say is, well, I've got this. Go ahead, Patrick.
That Michelle doesn't do it. So if the players really mean business, what they should do, quite obviously, is strike during the playoffs of the year before the CBA runs out, so that they can't be locked out, right? Because once the playoffs are run, then the only option is a lockout.
And they should have that in their head because remember, that's how they got rid of Donald Sterling, right? The Clippers players are like, hey, we're not going to play this playoff game. You guys better do something.
Right. But I mean, obviously that's going to be much worse for the fans than, well, I guess it's hard to say. It's obviously much worse for half of the team's fans.
Oh, I see what you're saying. The players had the PR on their side for Sterling, but they won't otherwise.
I'm not care as an NBA fan, but as a Timberwolves fan, I'm not going to care if the players strike, right?
But look, here's one thing, though. They could move Chris Bosh. They could go to Whiteside and say, look, we'll give you a max deal. We'll move Chris Bosh's salary out, and you'll be our big man in the future. I mean,
Yeah, the problem is all of that requires him to sit around and ignore other teams' max offers while he's waiting for the Heat to get their shit together. And that just doesn't seem very probable, right? I mean, if you look at the cap situation next year, there's probably going to be on the order of 10 teams that are going to be able to throw max money at Whiteside. So
it's just too hard to thread the needle, right? They can't have that trade set up right as free agency
saying,
starts.
Trust us, Hassan, trust us, turn all those offers down, and we'll take care of you. It's just not likely to happen, right? He's going to be looking at max offers from not only many teams, but also many teams that many players would love to play for, right? Because there's going to be situations where, maybe he could play in LA because it's nice to be in LA. Maybe he could play for a contending team. I think that they're like a team like Boston, for example, could probably throw max money at him, and that looks like a very attractive situation. I mean, they're basically he would have to say no to a lot of really attractive situations and hope that after he says no to all of them, that he get their shit together in time, and none of the money that's like available gets locked up so that he's like frozen out either. I don't see that happening.
So it's just too risky not to trade him.
I think the only way the Heat could guarantee this is they renounce Dwayne Wade's right, and immediately, like the next minute after they renounce his rights, they offer Whiteside a max contract. But then they're basically competing with all the other teams that are throwing max money at him.
But then you run into an issue. Like, that's the problem. Then you run into an issue with Whiteside going, hey, you just screwed over Wade again. And if Whiteside incorrectly thinks Wade is a key part of this franchise, but for what it's worth, Wade is impressing me with his performance, but it requires a lot of caveats, right? I basically have to say, for a guy this old with this much wear and tear on his body, I am really, and by the way, I've been checking the box scores really every week, but I haven't been checking I didn't look at the player situation. Yeah, Wade's a slightly above average player right now, but he's scoring 28.9 points. So, but the issue being, what do you tell Whiteside? You're like, we're going to get rid of this guy that scores 30 points a game. And don't worry, we're still going to be, we're up there with Boston, who, looks great and has a top 5 pick coming to them, or a top 10 or whatever. So,
yeah, I mean, there's a ton of variables that we don't know too. We don't know how well Whiteside likes his teammates, how well he likes Miami. We just there's a ton we don't know. But it just seems to me like the equation is very simple. If the Heat get any offers that are actually sort of attractive, an above average player on a good contract, they should take them. I think they should not even blink. But I don't think a lot of those offers are actually going to come along. I think most teams are really, trying to just dump maybe second round picks and expiring contracts and stuff like that the Heat don't really need.
The last thought I had was, and you had already said this, is I like to see if this tests out the theory that Kobe has been nullifying the Lakers. Because if he ends up on the Lakers, it just means that the beacon that got them Wilt and Kareem and Shaq, and Dwight, this just weird beacon that the Lakers have to just pull the top big men to them. If Kobe leaves and they get him back, you'll be like, oh, okay, Kobe.
Well, you have to admit, if you are any superstar player right now, if you just subtract Kobe from the equation, then the Lakers look like an amazing place to be because of its history. I mean, it's like joining the Yankees, right? Or the Dallas Cowboys, or whatever, right? So it's a prestige franchise, right? It's like if you play European football, then you probably want to play for Barcelona or Bayern Munich or Arsenal, right? And if you play the NBA, the Lakers and the Celtics are just sort of those prestige franchises. But obviously, Kobe has counteracted all of that in the last couple of years. But now that Kobe's out of the equation, it becomes a very interesting prospect.
What about Jim Buss versus Jerry Buss?
Yeah,
some would
that's
say.
The thing. Personally, it's as any player, I'd be a little bit nervous about the whole Jim Buss effect. But I think we're going to have to see how Buss behaves in the post-Kobe era before we can make a judgment about that.
Fair enough. Okay, so anything else to say? I mean, we've talked a lot, and there's a lot of speculation. I'm excited. I'm not going to lie. It is. I love having trade speculation rumors because they're the most fun as a fan. And my reminder to everybody, even though it's a long ways off, we're deep in the NBA season, as the off season gets so boring.
Yeah.
So if there are any rumors, if there's anything, just latch on and enjoy them because they disappear. So even though it's coming during the NBA season,
to the off season are amazing, and then it's oh wow, nothing's happening. Nothing's ever happening.
Trey, I just want to state one last thing while we've got the Boxscore Geeks tools up here. Whiteside is clearly better than both Howard and Cousins this season and has been. I mean, I think that's not obvious in the mainstream media that he's so much better than those two guys. Let's just state that plainly.
Yeah. I feel like it's obvious to me and probably to most people that are listening to this podcast. Because I'm gonna go out on a limb and say
we got to be noob friendly
for this podcast. But I mean, yeah, I understand your point that in the mainstream media, those two guys are bigger.
So sorry about that. If you just saw me shouting, my wife just got home, so I had to do some ninjutsu and Skype myself while I shouted to her to let her know I'm on the scope.
Speaking of ninjutsu, I got to put something in the oven because that's how I roll. I'll be back in like 2 minutes. So entertain our viewers for just 2 minutes. For me.
You lucky listeners, you almost missed, and you almost missed out on some dead air there. Or Brian, you've actually handled that well. There have been a few shows where my mic goes out and you just are like, I guess I got to talk now. And unlike Garth from Wayne's World. That reference land? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I haven't seen that in a while. Although there was it may have been on RollingStone.com actually, an article about the history of using the, Bohemian Rhapsody, and they went back and interviewed all the original guys from Wayne's World. So apparently Mike Myers is a very big fan of that song. But hope you got something good going there, Patrick.
Yeah, I know this isn't going to be of any use to any of you listeners, but I'm telling you, that's going to be a tasty hash brown dish when it's finished.
Ooh.
Oh, awesome. I'm jealous. I'm probably going to just eat some cereal when I'm done here. All right. So we didn't even start. We talked a little bit about Wayne's World, which has nothing to do with anything. So anyway, next topic up is the Spurs. So as I mentioned in the tease, I think if we look at the point differential, and I don't know if it's strength of schedule, I'm going to hop over to Basketball Reference real quick, but the Spurs are basically caught up in theory to the Warriors. The Warriors were playing off the charts. They had a strength of they had a point differential in terms of their victories so astronomical that people were actually asking us on the notes, Patrick. They're like, this is like, this team has a wins produced of above 1. Does this happen? Obviously they don't anymore, but they did for a brief period there. And they're still actually amazing. Their margin of victory, strength adjusted schedule is still astronomical. But the key point now is, so is the Spurs. Actually, both of these teams currently are like top 10 all-time teams, at least contemporary teams, according to the numbers. And so the Spurs basically caught up to the Warriors kind of, and they're both amazing teams at this point. So we definitely wanted to give the Spurs some love, because if you've been listening, we have basically this has been the 76ers Warriors show while those streaks were going on. And luckily, both of those streaks are dead. Long live the streak. So we want to give the Spurs some love. And the first thing I want to shout out, and I'm curious about your thoughts here, Patrick, is LaMarcus Aldridge is the exact same player he was on Portland so far. And the real key to this, the Spurs, seems to be that they're really good players that were kind of banged up last year. Tony Parker and Kawhi have come back healthy. And that seems to be it. And I wonder how much mainstream notices that.
I think the mainstream is starting to catch on about Kawhi Leonard, mostly because his points per game has gone up. And of course, winning Defensive Player of the Year probably kind of wakes some people up a little bit about that too. I feel like the phrase of this in the annals of history, the phrase that I'm going to associate with this season is the phrase "in any other year," because in any other year we would be talking about Kawhi Leonard as a candidate for MVP. But unfortunately, this year, like, the spots 1 through 5 in the MVP race are all Stephen Curry. So in this particular year, I don't consider Leonard, at least not yet, an MVP candidate. But I mean, maybe that could change. Maybe Curry will cool down a little bit, and then we have an interesting race. But I mean, Leonard has been absolutely amazing, and it's been kind of shocking how good Ginobili has been too at his age. And I think they're just kind of, the Spurs are this machine, right? They play within the system. They have a bunch of guys who play within the system. I agree with you that Aldridge is the same player he's always been, and I think they overpaid a lot for him, because when Duncan retires, I don't think that Aldridge is going to replace that sort of defense and rebounding presence that Duncan has. But
I've got two thoughts. I've got two questions on that for you. One thing that is making this team remarkably good is their defense. And while we don't give credence to Aldridge's defense is not going to turn him from what our numbers say, an average player, into a star player, but it can turn him from an average player to a good player. Yeah. And so I'm curious if Aldridge is really helping the team D. Like, that's one question first.
Well, I mean, Aldridge has always been a solid defender. I mean, no one would ever, I think, accuse him of being a poor defender, but I think that he's always had the advantage of playing next to guys like, well, I won't say always, but he's had the advantage of playing next to guys like Lopez and Duncan, who are very good defenders, and those probably make him look better than he is. Um, I mean, I don't think the Spurs ever have to worry about him being like a negative defender, and there's enough sort of team system in most NBA defenses that isn't going to be a big problem for them.
One other question on Aldridge, and this is, I was, somebody pointed this out last week. So last week when you were on the show, we talked the Celtics a lot. And somebody just made the point, hey, everything is going well for the Celtics. Sullinger's playing well, Bradley's playing well. You got all these pieces going right. You want to be careful not to just cherry pick and just compliment them because they're doing well. You want to analyze. And I give something to that, and I still say the Celtics are in good shape. What I would argue for, and I want to be careful about just being overly complimentary to the Spurs because they're the Spurs, but one thing I would say is Aldridge is like the first big name free agent they've ever gotten. All of their other players have been, through clever means or trusting loyalty of, basically Duncan, Robinson, if you were going to consider star players that could have gone elsewhere. So I'm really curious if this is just a good trade asset to have, if they realized, hey, if we need to trade for something after Duncan gets old or whatever, we're going to need a significant asset. And the market value of Aldridge, the perceived value of Aldridge still has to be high. And so, if he doesn't have a no trade exception, the them being able to use him in the future for a trade asset seems like it's there.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the Spurs, if you look back in their history, they do not do a lot of big trades. Like the last one, obviously, was the George Hill trade for Kawhi Leonard, which, if you kind of like, I forget where it was. I think it was on Grantland. There was like a big expose of basically the timeline that happened when they went after Leonard, and it was all very methodical. Like the team doesn't just kind of like. Peter Holt just doesn't just wake up one day and said, "Go get me player X." There's just a big team process that seems to happen. So I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine what, if anything, they will do with LaMarcus Aldridge in the post Duncan era. And there's always the possibility that Pop has some secret plan to turn him into a much better player, that you and I can only dream about right now.
but one note I just want to point out in Spurs history, and I'll actually have to make sure I haven't been doing extensive notes, but I'll try and look this up just to make sure I'm not just misremembering things. But I believe when Chris Paul came on the market, the Spurs did offer up Tony Parker. So it's not they are a loyal team, and as you mentioned, a methodical team, but they are not a team that is not if there is absurd value on the market, I would say ironically, if Whiteside's bird rights were there, I would jokingly say they should offer up Aldridge for Whiteside, but what are you going to do?
Of course they should, but I think also there's a lot of they won't just go after any star player, because I think the Spurs do a lot of analyzing in terms of whether a player's personality will fit them. And so for whatever reason, I think Pop and the Spurs in this particular last offseason looked at all the available free agents and they said, LaMarcus Aldridge is the guy that we want to go after because he fits the Spurs because of his personality and all these things. So, I mean, they could have gone after a lot of players, but they went after Aldridge the hardest. And I don't really know like how things are going to develop in the future, what like players would even become available that fit the Spurs mold. It feels like the type of players that fit the Spurs mold don't often come onto the market because they're usually like, quality team players that teams like to have around and who don't stir up trouble in their respective teams, who like the kind of guy who goes to management and says, I want to trade, damn it, doesn't seem like the kind of guy that the Spurs generally go after.
And it's worth noting that, for instance, they did let go of like Dennis Rodman back in the day, undoubtedly one of the best talents, and they even recognized it. Right, they did well with him, but they were just like, no, we are not dealing with, I can't actually fault them too much. It is worth noting that like Dennis Rodman showed up late to a game because he was recording a wrestling segment for WCW back in the day, and it's like, yeah, you're dealing with that kind of player.
He also like. In Phil Jackson's book, he talked about some choice quotes with Dennis Rodman, and like Phil told Dennis, like, I think you're actually a selfish help defender. What do you say to that? And Rodman was like, David Robinson's a defensive player of the year. I don't need to play help defense on his man. And it's like, when you see those kinds of statements, it's like, well, you probably don't fit into a Spurs-like system.
Was he wrong there, though, Patrick? I mean, Robinson's pretty good.
Yes, because even if you're the defensive player...
You can't go against the coach?
What I'm saying is okay, if we take the best defensive player in the NBA, and you can pick whoever you want, maybe you think it's Green, and maybe you think it's Kawhi Leonard, and whatever, Tony Allen, that guy gets beat like a dozen times a night because he plays against NBA players, right? He usually plays against the best offensive player on the other team because he's their best defender. So, I mean, Tony Allen still has to go out and defend James Harden.
What if he's wearing his Jedi robe during the Tony Allen Jedi robe giveaway night they had? Do you think he'd get beat then? I don't know.
We're
I don't know
lucky
what
Brian
that was,
watches
like
stuff.
really...
Look it up. That's a real thing. Tony Allen Jedi robes.
Why doesn't my franchise have cool things like that?
Seriously, I was so jealous of that.
Fair enough.
So anyway, the point is that as great as Rodman was, and I think we all agree he's like a top 10 all-time NBA player, and by we all, I mean all of us in this podcast. As great as he was, his personality problems were definitely real, and you can't blame Popovich for just saying, fuck this, I'm not dealing with this shit. I have Tim Duncan now, so fuck you.
and it is, there is something to that, because the Bulls are a fantastic example of kind of a lot of our philosophy of like building a strong, like you have to have a 5-year plan if you want to contend. That's one of the reasons we're starting to come down to the 76ers. We're like, if you had a 5-year plan, you're in the middle of year 3. If this was a college course, you're right past the midterm and you just failed the midterm. So it's going to be really hard for you to pass this class, let alone ace this class based on that. But the Bulls, Jordan feuded with management, Krause feuded with Phil Jackson, the owner feuded with everybody. They were able to make this kind of sustained greatness in 2, I would argue, like 4-year stretches, right? Like 1990 to 1993. And then when Jordan and Rodman came back, that second three-peat, that did not sustain, and that completely fell apart, because that's the point, is you're not going to keep sustained greatness. So it is a hard thing, and I can go both ways, right? Like if you offer me a good enough player, even if I think they're a cancer in the locker room, I am going to be like, if for whatever reason, if Curry had a bad attitude, I would be like, he's Stephen Curry. I mean,
sure.
Whatever.
Yeah, and I agree with that too, but that also means you need to find really good coaches who can handle that stuff, right? I mean, Phil Jackson was actually, that is probably arguably the thing that made Phil Jackson great, is that he took really hard personalities and he just handled them, right? He dealt with Michael Jordan, and Scottie Pippen was also like kind of a petulant child in a lot of ways.
It was the famous time he sat out at the end of the game, right?
Right. Dennis Rodman had all kinds of problems, and then Kobe and Shaq. I mean, Phil Jackson was a master juggler of difficult personalities. Whereas I think Pop is probably not as great a juggler of difficult personalities. I think he just gets rid of personalities that don't fit his system and has a great eye for talent and the kinds of players that will work well in his system.
And by the way, I was hoping to get a clever way to get this in, but I don't have a clever segue, but we're winding down to the Spurs, so I got to get this in. So Patrick, have you seen the Spurs HEB commercials?
No.
These are amazing things. So if you haven't seen, and I'm guessing you may have seen 1 or 2 of these, just because if you follow the internet blogosphere and basketball, these pop up. But this is like your homework from this podcast to you, to Brian, to everybody. Look at the HEB Spurs commercials. It's like a local grocery mart in San Antonio, and they are hilarious. And the only reason this kind of tied into what you were just saying is it's got all the Spurs, and they're making fun jokes with each other, selling things like jalapeno poppers and salsa and ice cream from this local supermarket. And they are amazing. They're some of the best things ever, and it's a funny, weird cultural fit. But it's like the fact that this grocery chain in Texas can get all of the Spurs together to like joke around each other and make funny commercials it's part of the magic. And I have nothing to say about that. I don't even know if it helps them win, but I love them, and they're an amazing thing that comes.
We just showed Cooking with Chef Tony there that you linked, Dre, and Chef Tony is cooking this year. He's got like 61% true shooting. So good job, Chef Tony.
I think the reason I've never seen these is because Sean Elliott is ranked 30 out of 30 in terms of color commentators on League Pass. So if I ever watch a Spurs game, I am always watching the other team's broadcast. Seriously, like Sean Elliott's homerism drives me up the fucking wall. I can't stand it.
Well, I didn't realize this because I mean I do watch like Broncos games, but it's usually like party atmosphere and friends. But I like watched the amazing one where they took down Brady and the Patriots. Shame that they couldn't sustain that. But one of the broadcasters for the Broncos apparently just hates the Broncos, which is a really weird thing, and I hadn't realized it until my friends pointed out at a party. But anyway, so that's the Spurs. I do want to give one more shout out because I don't feel we necessarily talked about him as much. Tony Parker is playing amazing this season, and we were actually this seems to just be what happens with me. Like I look at Manu Ginobili, and I'm like, he's old and beat up, and maybe they should move on him. And I look at last year was the same with Tony Parker. I was like, he's old, he's beat up, maybe they should move on him. And the next season they come out swinging, and I'm just like, well, fine, thanks for making me look silly.
yeah. Tony Parker and Ginobili kind of you never knew because even though he's getting old, he's still Manu Ginobili, and he's always been amazing, and you never know. But Tony Parker, holy cow, he's having a great resurgence of the season.
Anything else to end on the Spurs, Brian or Patrick?
I'm just mesmerized by these HEB commercials we're showing now on stream.
We've lost our producer to that.
Oh yeah.
I'm not going to lie. This could have been the whole show because it's pretty obvious that this is kind of one of my guilty pleasures about like sports. And these don't make fantastic articles. I could do one of these every week, but I did travel this week, and so this is the only thing I had in my head for an article this week, Patrick. But the Ralph Sampson trade, and I would love to just get a few of your thoughts on it if you've got a chance to read it, which is just basically the reason I just said that to Patrick is I did post this late in the afternoon, but or in the afternoon, right before the 2 p.m. deadline.
Yeah, I did manage to read it like this afternoon. Yeah.
Awesome. But yeah, I mean, this is, like I said, just one of those things that I love. I love looking over NBA history. I love looking at trades like this. It's not, I mean, the only real conceivable tie-in I have to the current NBA season is, the Kobe situation and everybody bringing up Chris Paul. So that's why it was on my mind is, every game the Lakers lose, you basically hear, and myself included, I was pointing this out before the season, is that Chris Paul trade that almost happened. This Laker team doesn't exist. Kobe's not on this team. Chris Paul has a match.
Wait, why wouldn't Kobe be on the team?
Kobe is not on this team in the capacity he wants because there's no way Kobe gets $25 million. What happens is Chris Paul gets a max deal, and Kobe, in the best case scenario, gets a minor thing. And I could even buy Kobe flaming out, getting mad at the management, and leaving, thinking he's not in charge. But they would wisely have gone with Curry. Or not Curry. Of course they go with Curry, but they would have wisely gone with Chris Paul. Obviously, that didn't happen with Dwight Howard. There was that moment, but then they sided with Kobe over Dwight. I don't buy for a second that happens Kobe versus Chris Paul. And so, like I said,
probably not. But at the same time, there's also the possibility that Chris Paul, after a year with Kobe, says, "You know what? Fuck this. I'm going somewhere else." Right?
that would have been hilarious. But all I said is I compare this to a trade that almost happened in NBA history that you might not be aware of. The 1980 Celtics that made 9 finals and won 5 titles. Basically, 3 of their finals came about because they failed at a blockbuster trade. They really wanted to get Ralph Sampson, and they were offering up their bench. They were offering up future picks, and when it didn't happen, they spent their future pick on James Worthy. They kept their role players, and it was a magical time. And I figured it was just worth throwing out there for Lakers fans for something to say. Your part of your storied history came about basically because of a Chris Paul-like scenario.
Yeah, I feel like the Lakers are full of scenarios like that, right? I mean, like, what happens if the Lakers pull off a trade of trading Kobe to Chicago for a bunch of filler instead of waiting and then getting Pau Gasol? That's 3 finals and 2 titles that don't happen either, right?
Yeah, because probably. I mean, there was at some point if we get into the Kobe territory, I guess at one point there was like a Jason Kidd. How am I dropping his name so quickly? I feel really bad about this. Jason Kidd, the other really good player that helped Dallas, Sean Marion. Jason Kidd and Sean. There was like a Jason Kidd, Sean Marion deal on the table, I guess, for Kobe at some point.
Allegedly. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the Chicago deal was, but I feel like it was like a couple of first-round picks and
the best they could have
maybe
offered.
It might have even been. Was this back when Ron Artest was still in Chicago?
Oh wow!
I don't remember. Like I don't remember what the scenario was, but apparently it almost happened. That they almost traded Kobe to Chicago. And in that scenario, they go back into rebuilding for a couple years. They don't. That Pau Gasol trade never happens, and then 3 finals and two titles never happen. Right? That's and then I mean, you can kind of go back in history and think of all kinds of random. That wasn't there a situation around the Magic trade, because I feel like it had something to do with Norm Nixon at the time. But they almost didn't get the pick that became Magic Johnson.
I don't know what the pick scenario was, but a funny thing is they actually had a terrible owner. I think it was I might be getting his name wrong. I think it was Jack Kent Cook. Again, just another plug for this great book. Check out Showtime by Jeff Pearlman. It's a great read. But he talks about this in depth there. And actually, like, Magic kind of didn't gel with the owner. And they were debating, I forget, it was he went to Milwaukee instead. You're proving that I'm forgetting names today, Patrick. Sid Moncrief. So the owner almost said, we don't need to worry about this Magic kid with his like attitude. We could just go with Sid Moncrief instead. Don't forget that Magic Johnson in his second season actually was considered a malcontent across the league because he feuded with a coach and got the coach fired. So, it's another funny scenario where it's kind of like a weird putting him in that boat, but it wasn't another era, like considering Magic Johnson like a Dennis Rodman scenario where they almost passed on him.
I think it doesn't surprise me at all that Magic Johnson stirred up trouble. I'm just sure he did it with a big smile on his face.
Exactly.
That's okay. Yeah. Maybe this Pat Riley guy will work out. We'll give it a try.
Yeah. Well, they did talk about it that way, where basically he like had in like an interview, he just kind of like shook his head solemnly and was like, maybe they ought to trade me, and like smile, did the Magic smile or whatever. But he said that, and Jeff Pearlman's like, this was BS. This was a completely political, intelligent move. He was leaking this, like he was basically using the media to tell the owner to fire. Like they're like
Magic,
there was
like next to Jordan, I don't think there was any player who was better at manipulating the media than Magic Johnson.
Exactly. So yeah. So anyway, by the way, thank you, Patrick. You let me get out my, just an excuse to talk about the 1980s Lakers or just NBA history in general.
I'll take any excuse to talk the Celtics and the Lakers in the 80s. And even sometimes those bad boys of Detroit too.
Oh yeah, those another plug there. If anybody out there hasn't seen the Bad Boy Pistons 30 for 30, must watch. All right, I'm gonna call that good. I'll let you get the last thought on just anything you want to say NBA related, Patrick, and then I'll take us into shoutouts.
My last thought. I'm sorry I came a little hectic, rushed from work today. I'm a little frazzled. Don't know if I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm definitely sort of looking forward to the holiday break, in which I hope to get some time to do some coding and maybe get some nice graphs and other stuff on the website, and also more importantly, start writing some articles.
Oh, that would be amazing. All right, and I'm actually going to be remiss about this. I don't actually, I could throw out some filler shoutouts, but I don't actually have any good shoutouts that I thought about this week. And that's just, if you've been listening, people, I've been a little, okay, excellent. I've just been a little, I've been forgetting names and stuff. Maybe I got a concussion or something this week, but I'll let you go, Patrick.
So my shout out is probably one that tons of our listeners maybe know, but basically I have been listening a lot to Garbage Time with Katie Nolan lately. Great show and or podcast, and Katie Nolan herself, smart lady, funny lady, really great for sports fans. And she also has like pretty interesting sort of, I want to say, real things to say about, topics like what she, if you want to Google what she had to say about Greg Hardy when he came back and things like that. She manages to do that great magic trick where she's entertaining and funny, yet actually has significant things to say about relevant topics, even in this crazy world of sports. And Garbage Time is a fantastic, funny show. I love it.
Awesome. I'm actually looking forward to this because we're both dog owners, as I think you mentioned. I don't know if you mentioned you picked up your dog right before the show, so you might not have said that on air. But for those who missed it, Patrick picked up his dog right before the show. I like listening to podcasts on the walk, so that I'll definitely add that to the rotation.
Wow, your walk's that long? My walks are like 10, 15 minutes with my dog.
Your dog eats a lot of fiber, I guess, Patrick.
I usually go like 30 minutes to an hour if I can squeeze it in. I like going for that.
Yeah, I do about like 20 minutes in the morning, and then 20 minutes after work, and then maybe a 15-minute or like before we go to bed.
But see, you could just split it into two. Anyway.
Well, yeah, sure. It's enough time for a podcast.
Boxscore Geeks advice on how to go for a walk. All right. Anything from you, Brian?
Oh, I've got tons of shout outs
And
today,
having a
Dre.
dog,
Tons.
it's like having dogs like having a baby. Suddenly, all of your conversations revolve around poop.
That's funny too. And then I don't get sleep. Like my one of my dogs does not care in the early morning that I am asleep. It is food time. So I wake up every morning at 6, no matter when I go to bed. And sometimes, as you know, Patrick, from our emails back and forth, I go to bed at like 4. So that's always a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right, Brian, you said you had.
Oh, I've got tons of shout outs. Yeah, I'll crank through them here. No, first to Abby Wambach. You know, she's being called the greatest of all time U.S. Women's soccer player, or maybe the best player. I don't know. Sorry, I'm too chauvinist to follow women's soccer that closely, but, you know, great career, Abby Wambach. Secondly, shout out to the University of Kansas for putting the only known audio of Dr. James Naismith, the inventor of basketball, on their website. It's a short clip, but it's really interesting. The one thing I got about is he says that he instituted dribbling after the first few games to prevent tackling and slugging. So he figured that out way before the NFL, I guess, 100 years before, that you don't want it to get too violent.
Do you think Naismith's solution to the NFL would be to just, make the ball bouncy and
slow the game down, basically. Yeah, that was his solution. But anyway, we'll put up a link. It's, an interesting old-timey radio segment to listen to. And, of course, I do have an esports shout-out today as well. Another StarCraft shout-out, for Twitch TV. Monk Sung-Wan, a.k.a. Acer MMA, retired. This is end of the year StarCraft retirements. The 5th all-time prize money earner in SC2 history. He got his nickname because he used to train MMA. He had to retire from that due to injury and turn to StarCraft. He was also the protege of the legendary Slayers Boxer, known as the Son of Boxer, so great career for him. I enjoyed watching his games. That's it for me.
I'm hoping, we've talked about, the rise of esports. I'm hoping we can get into it at some point, because that would be another fun thing to add to the show. Maybe, Brian. I'm glad that you keep up on it, because I remember I came out with like a glowing review of why, like, in theory, it's a fantastic thing, but then of course I don't follow it at all. So that is amazing. All right, everyone, that is our show. If you found us not through the site, you can find us on boxscoregeeks.com. This show goes live every Tuesday, Wednesday, somewhere in that time, based on our schedule. The trick is you have to follow myself, Nerd Numbers, Patrick Minton, NBA Geek, or Brian, who is Boxscore Brian on Twitter, so that we'll announce we're going live. But usually it is Tuesday, Wednesday, somewhere in that 8:30 range. We might move that around just based on how holiday schedules and stuff go. You can find us on iTunes and Stitchers as the Boxscore Geeks Show. We are on twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers, as I mentioned, and we have all of our shows archived on YouTube. I do a weekly column on top 10 box scores of the week. If you see any that you think I should include, hashtag or tweet at me, BSG Top 10, and let me know. And with that, we will see you next week.